Welcome to our next research symposium, Understanding Contextual Influences on Children's Media Use. So over the next 50 minutes, we're going to explore the complex interplay between individual traits, environmental contexts, and digital design, and how those things shape young children's media use behaviors and developmental outcomes, highlighting the importance of aligning digital design with children's developmental needs and contexts. So, to get us started, our first presentation is Children's Screen Use Partially Mediates the Link Between Household Chaos and Kindergartner Sleep by Adelaide Delali Klutse. Adelaide is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies at the Pennsylvania State University, studying the relationship between relational and environmental family contexts and childhood outcomes.
Okay. So one thing that binds all of us here is our concern about children and how they are using screens. There's also the big question about the impact of screens and the sensationalism attached to it. You will see there that there's an article. It's a meta-analysis of the effects of electronic screen use on children's socio-emotional problems. There we have a blog post, or you will call it a news article by some journalists. And these two articles are actually called from the meta-analysis. It's interesting if you read how the interpretation has been done, but then it draws our minds to the fact that people want answers. Other people are transmitting that kind of information to them. If we don't do the work of translation, someone else will. A child screens and bedtime. So I'm going to show you a video of a classic child in our study. Okay, so I'm sorry. Can we please have the video now? So this is a child transitioning to kindergarten. This is the summer before kindergarten. And I would let you just watch this video. So you may have observed from watching the video that the screen was the bedtime. It was bedtime. Mom took child to the bedroom, handed over the screen. After over an hour, mom comes back, takes the screen. But whatever was going on in the background, which we suspect is another television, was still running until the child went to bed. And how did we get this video? We actually had cameras in the homes of the families, and we have 230 families in our sample. Okay. So research suggests that children from homes that experience more household chaos are more likely to spend time on screens, a phenomenon attributed to the possible lack of limit setting in these homes. We also know that when children are exposed to screens at bedtime, their sleep is impacted. Specifically, every minute of increase in screen exposure predicts worse sleep. We also know that levels of household chaos predict nighttime sleep, such that children from more chaotic households have their sleep negatively impacted. It is important to focus on children's sleep because of the known physical, socio-emotional, and cognitive outcomes, and it is especially important during the transition to kindergarten, not just because kindergarten is the beginning of formal schooling, but because we know that when a child is transitioning to kindergarten and they have 10 plus hours of nighttime sleep, it translates into good outcomes socio-emotionally and cognitively. So what did we do? We know that there's a lot of good work on cross-sectional data on children at other stages about how they are navigating screen use. There's a lot missing in terms of longitudinal studies that look at screen use, especially within the context of the home. So our question was this. We sought to explore whether screen exposure at different times of day mediates the relationship between household chaos and children's sleep. We collected data from 230 children transitioning to kindergarten. Data were collected in the summer and early fall. A research staff called families every day for 7 days and asked questions about what activities children were engaged in. There was no specific question about screen time. Parents themselves volunteered the information and said, my child was on an iPad or my child was watching the TV. And that's how we called data from screen time. To measure household chaos, a trained observer visited the homes and recorded household chaos using the Discord measure. This measure assesses the dimensions of family life and household organization. Sleep data was extracted from ActiWatches. In addition to the information on screen time that I have here projected, we also know that the number of minutes between dinner and bedtime exposure of screen use were significantly different. We know that these families were not highly chaotic. There were no gender differences for sleep duration or screen exposure at different times. We also know that 75 of the children in our sample had a television in their bedroom. For a child with a television in their room, it meant that on average, they slept for 10 minutes less than their counterparts without a television. They also had 6 more minutes of screen exposure than their counterparts who had a television in the room. They also slept about 28 minutes later than their peers who did not have a television in the room. So now that we have this framing, we put in screen exposure at dinner time as a mediator. There were no linkages. The next thing we did was to put in screen exposure at bedtime as a mediator of the relationship, controlling for screen exposure at dinner time. What we found is that the consistent relationship between household chaos and children's nighttime sleep remained. We also found that when a child was from a household that had higher amounts of chaos, it did predict the exposure to screens. We also did find that when they had been exposed to screens before bedtime, it did influence the number of minutes of sleep they were having. So, what is all of this about? Screen exposure is not universally bad. It is timing and the context within which it occurs that matters. At this stage, children need at least 10 hours of nighttime sleep. Reliance on screens to put children to sleep is particularly problematic. Families are encouraged to develop routines and improve organization and predictability. This has the potential to decrease screen exposure at bedtime and facilitate sleep health. We cannot do away with screens, but we can at least start with being intentional about when the screen exposure occurs, including monitored screen use and screen use within limits. No guilt about screen use. Again, screens are here to stay and are a fact of life. The challenge to parents is to understand when screen use is, and it's also not to disrupt children's functioning. In this case, disruptive to a good night's sleep. A major takeaway of this study is to keep screens, TVs, iPads, etc. out of the child's bedroom, especially at bedtime, and never to use screens as a means of putting children to sleep. The strength of our work is that it's longitudinal in data. We have data from 2 separate time points. The actual data set has data from 4 different time points. Our work focuses on naturalistically occurring events. Every child experiences bedtime. Every child experiences dinner time. A different person reported on each measure, or or a different equipment, and that eliminates a single reporter bias. So we are not saying that parents are telling us how chaotic their homes are. They are the same people telling us what time their children are sleeping, and they're the same people telling us screen exposure. That's not what's happening in this study. We have different sources of information. And this study is timely. It pushes us to think more about screen use within the context of the family, as screen use is really not an independent activity. Interestingly, the mealtime screen use did not predict nighttime sleep. And speculations is because it's an issue of proximity versus distalness. So exposure to screens at nighttime is proximal to the sleep time versus the distal nature of dinner time exposure. So maybe it's at what time in the day you're exposing the child to the screens versus how long matters, but maybe how long and at what time is what is contributing to the outcomes we are seeing. You're welcome. Yes, please, I can take.
Were you looking at the quality of the content that the children were watching at bedtime? Like, was it violent content or age-appropriate content? Did you look at that?
No, unfortunately, no. We have the videos. We are going back to recode videos, but this screen time information is from families. It's like from mothers telling us what happened. But I've coded some of the videos and I've rewatched some of the videos, and they are interesting. So we would see what would emerge from that data. You had a question. I have time for one.
Thanks. It's really interesting study. I'm just wondering, the video that you showed is the child in their bedroom space. What about children who were in a different space in the household who still had technology just before bedtime? Do you have to capture that as well, or is it only in the bedroom space?
So we have videos of different aspects of the home. We decided to show a video of the bedroom space to give a contextualizing of what we are talking about. Okay, I have time for one more question. Yes, please.
So what is your recommendation for how long before bedtime?
I would say it should not be proximal. So this was within 60 minutes of the bedtime. And if you looked at the averages, what is it? Sorry. Yeah, so at bedtime, children were having on average 15.84 minutes of screen exposure, and that was still impacting them. So I would say take the screens away at bedtime entirely. Once you know it's 60 minutes to bedtime, or even 120 minutes to bedtime, please take the screens away. Thank you.
All right. Our next presentation is From Early Temperament to Later Problematic Media Use, the Mediating Role of Adolescent Temperament by Mahmut, Sami, Gurdal. Mahmut is a doctoral candidate in human development at Virginia Tech, also studying the role of technology on child development in the family context.
Hi everyone, my name is Mahmut Sami Gurdal and I am a PhD candidate in Human Development at Virginia Tech. Today I am talking about the role of early temperament on later problematic media use. As an introduction, adolescence is a key stage of life in terms of psychosocial development, and during this period of time, media habits can shape developmental outcomes. And previous studies linked problematic media use to negative developmental and educational outcomes, like poor well-being and less academic success. And previous studies found that temperament is related to problematic media use, and specifically they found that higher levels of effortful control was related to lower levels of problematic media use. On the other hand, higher level of negative affectivity was related to higher problematic media use. However, no studies examined the role of early temperaments on later problematic media use. At this point, we examined the relation between middle childhood temperaments and adolescence problematic media use via adolescence temperament. Before the methodology, I would like to define key terms in this study. I can define temperaments under 3 categories. First one is effortful control. Effortful control is the ability to focus attention, inhibit impulses, and regulate behavior voluntarily. Second one is negative affectivity, and negative affectivity is the tendency to experience negative emotions like fear, frustration, and sadness more intense and frequently than other emotions. Lastly, surgency is a trait reflecting high levels of activity and excitement in response to stimulating situations. In addition to temperament, problematic media use can be defined as excessive or uncontrolled media use that negatively affect daily functioning. Data were collected from mothers of children. At time 1, 191 mothers of 9-year-old children were our participants, and at time 2, 123 mothers of 14-year-old children were our participants. And you can see the other demographic characteristics of children in the table 1. And the table 2 showed the other important demographics at time 1. Early adolescent temperament questionnaire was used to measure children temperamental characteristics at both time points. Mothers reported this questionnaire via 4-point Likert scale, and we created 3 factors based on 13 subscales. We use attention control, inhibitory control, and activation control subscales for effortful control. And we used frustration, depressive mood, and aggression subscales for negative affectivity. And we used surgency, fear, and shyness subscales for surgency. For problematic media use, short form of problematic media use measure was used. And mother report their children problematic media use behavior at only time 2 via 5-point Likert scale. You can see the results of preliminary analysis in the table. We found that time 2 age was significantly correlated with time 2 problematic media use. Therefore, we added time 2 age as covariates to all models. And we found that children's sex was significantly correlated with time 1 and time 2 effortful control, as well as time 1 and time 2 surgency. Therefore, we added children's sex as covariates for models that include effortful control and surgency. I am sorry for the typo. It shouldn't be negative affectivity. As main analysis, we run 3 mediation analyses, and we found that time 1 temperament was positively related to time 2 temperament for effortful control and negative affectivity. Of course, it is not a surprise because temperament is a trait, and it should be stable over time. And we found that time 2 effortful control was negatively related to time 2 problematic media use. However, time 2 negative affectivity was positively related to time 2 problematic media use. On the other hand, we couldn't find any direct relation between early temperament and later problematic media use for effortful control and negative affectivity. And you can see the role of covariates here. And we found a significant indirect relation between time 1 temperament and time 2 problematic media use via time 2 temperament for effortful control and negative affectivity. In terms of surgency, we found the similar trend. Time 1 surgency significantly predict time 2 surgency. However, not only time 2 surgency, but also time 1 surgency were not related to time 2 problematic media use. This is the role of covariates, and time 2 surgency didn't mediate the relation between time 1 surgency and time 2 problematic media use. Long story short, higher levels of effortful control in middle childhood predicted higher levels of effortful control in adolescence, which was related to lower levels of problematic media use in adolescence. In terms of negative affectivity, higher levels of negative affectivity in middle childhood predicted higher levels of negative affectivity in adolescence, which was related to higher levels of problematic media use in adolescence. These results show that individual characteristics have important role on problematic media use. And yes, we couldn't find any direct relation between early temperament and later problematic media use. However, this doesn't mean that early temperament is not important, because intervention programs can identify potential risk groups based on temperament, and they can apply suitable interventions to decrease potential problematic media use in later life. As limitations, we use only mother report measures in this study, and therefore our results may include some potential biases because of social desirability. Potential studies can use a combination of parental report, self-report, and teacher reports. I don't mention on my slides, but we collected data for time 2 during COVID-19 lockdown process. And during this process, not only adolescents, but also everyone's media habits dramatically changed. So future studies can conduct this model again post-pandemic period. In addition, this is the first step that examines the relation between early temperament and later problematic media use, and we use only sex and age as covariates. But other potential factors like parenting stress or socioeconomic status may also contribute to problematic media use. And future studies can focus on this type of potential covariates. I'd like to thank to my advisors and collaborators, Drs. Cindy Smith, Koon Choi, and Martin Bell, for their contribution and support. In addition, another thank to National Institute of Health, Child Health and Human Development for their support at Taiwan. Thank you so much for listening to me. I think we have sometimes a couple of questions.
So I was wondering if you found any differences across the child sex for the results for effortful control, since I think typically girls have slightly higher effortful control than boys. So I was wondering if there was a interaction or different pattern for both.
Unfortunately, we didn't conduct any analysis to understand these patterns, but future it will be very meaningful to understand it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions?
You mentioned that some interventions could identify at-risk children. How do you think those interventions could go? How could they identify children who might be high in these temperamental factors, and what could they do to reduce temperamental?
Actually, temperament is a trait, and it includes both biological and environmental basis. And it shouldn't be possible to change children's temperament from negative affectivity to effortful control. But we cannot say that children's temperament 100% same over time, because our correlation analysis also showed that there are some difference in intensity of temperament. So interventions programs can focus on the change to intensity of some patterns of temperament, and they can promote the effortful control more. And they can, actually I don't know any intervention program related to problematic media use, but children who show higher levels of negative affectivity pattern may join to some intervention programs to decrease their potential later problematic media uses. Okay, if you don't have any questions, I think we can finish. Thank you.
I will ask, there's microphones on both sides, so please do jump up to the microphone if you have questions, just so everybody in the room can hear and the presenters can hear you well. Okay, so for our next presentation, we have the effects of app persuasive design and child self-regulation on their digital disengagement from Dr. Sumudu Mallawaarachchi. Sumudu is a research fellow at ARC Center of Excellence for the Digital Child at the University of, should have also asked about that pronunciation, Wollongong in Australia.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to present to all of you about the recent acute experimental work we've just completed, examining effects of persuasive app design and preschool children's self-regulation on their ability to disengage from digital devices. This work wouldn't have been possible if not for the incredible team of researchers that I mentioned here on this slide, but also if not for the support from the funding sources that I'd like to acknowledge. We know that the public discourse is often highlighting how children are glued to their screens, or about the big emotions, the tantrums that young children often have as they transition away from devices. But at the same time, there is a disproportionate amount of burden and responsibility that's placed on parents and families to navigate what's often referred to as the digital Wild West. There's an explosive growth of apps marketed to young children, but also a vast variety of app choices that are driven by algorithms. But there's something that's often overlooked in all of this, and that is how the design of digital environments that young children engage with are shaping their digital engagement. This brings us to persuasive design. This is the concept of digital design that capitalizes on behavioral design principles to keep users engaged for as long as possible, to hold a user's attention, motivate their return, but also to get them to spend money. There are variations of this concept in psychology, in human-computer interaction, UX design, and so on as well. So these design features can really range from engagement promoting, visually appealing, and motivating, to manipulative and deceptive type of design features that simply exist to drive commercial revenue into apps at the cost of the user's agency. So what I really want to show you is illustrate some of those examples of what that looks like in some popular young children's apps we've come across. So of course there's the classic rewards, the bells, whistles, sparkles, cheers, but also we've got level ups, which is the more you play, the longer, the more access you have to more sophisticated options, for example. Then this is an interesting one, and these are parasocial relationships. So this is the presence of favorite media characters on apps, and this can certainly be a positive thing if the character is scaffolding and promoting that learning. But what I want to show you here is more of a negative instance of that. So you can see that Hello Kitty there is not very happy that I've just chosen an option that they're not suggesting. They're thinking of something else and you've picked something else. There's locked options that lead to in-app purchase requests and classic prompts. If you watch this video, your reward is going to double, where in fact, when you press on that video, it's a disguised advert. Past research as well as reports have raised concerns, and including my own work, have raised concerns about the high prevalence of these design features in popular young children's apps that are top ranking in the commercial app markets. But there is still a gap, and that is we still don't know how young children respond to these design features. And that's exactly what we set out to answer. So while research argues that these design features could be a risk factor for problematic digital engagement, we know that problematic use is often a result of an interaction of multiple influences. So this study focused on one such interaction, and that was the one between persuasive design and the child's ability to self-regulate. And what I mean by that is the child's ability to exert control into their thoughts, their attention, their emotions and behavior, despite contrary impulses or distractions. And the present study looked at the influence of this interaction on a behavior that's commonly implicated in early childhood, the child's ability to transition away from a digital device when it's time to do something else. And that's what I've shown there. So the research question was really what the effects are of these design features on young children's ability to disengage from digital devices, but also, are these effects uniform across all children despite their abilities? Or are some children more vulnerable to manipulation by design? So we had a bit of a difficult task to begin with because we had to choose some app conditions that differed in levels of persuasive design while keeping other things as constant as possible. And so we settled with My Talking Tom, Care for My Cat, and PBS Kids' Daniel Tiger Play at Home as our high, moderate, and low persuasive design conditions, respectively. And this was based on lots of brainstorming and triangulating across 2 published content analyses of popular young children's apps. We tried to ensure a consistent theme of pet nurture and simulation, as well as fairly similar characters. But what we saw was that what was present, especially in the high condition, was this main character pressure, which were absent, for example, in the low condition. But also, what was absent in the low condition, which was present in the high and the moderate condition, was lots of aesthetic manipulation, in-app purchase requests, but also regular suggestions for things to do within the game, but also for alternative games. So we had 73 Australian preschool children take part in this study. So children were randomly assigned into one of those 3 apps on the iPad. And they played with the iPad on one of those 3 apps, and then we implemented what we call a novel digital disengagement paradigm. And what we did here was we had a 1-minute stand timer, and we told the child that when the timers run out, that they need to stop playing and move to this new location where the researcher was based. It was just at a proximal distance. So we assessed 2 things. First, the time to complete disengagement, and that was how long did it take for the child after the timer ran out to actually stop playing and move to that new location. We also assessed the level of independence of disengagement, which was, did the child disengage of their own volition when the timer ran out? Or did the researcher have to give some nudges or prompts to disengage? Or did the researcher have to actively go and turn off that iPad because they couldn't disengage? We also assessed self-regulation outside of digital context, using direct assessments of a curiosity box game, as well as the head, toes, knees, shoulders task. So we conducted general linear models, and so we wanted to see the main effects of digital design and self-regulation, as well as the interaction between these 2 variables on their ability to transition. And to conduct general linear models, we need categorical variables across the board. So what we did was we categorized children into high or low self-regulated groups based on a median split of the scores, which means every child relative to their peers in that sample were either high or low self-regulated. And this is what we found. It was quite interesting, as you can see, that the moderate and the high persuasive design groups had a similar pattern of findings. So because of that, we actually collapsed the 2 groups into one for our general linear models. And what we saw was that when children were exposed to moderate to high persuasive design, children with low self-regulation, so those are the white boxes, they took significantly longer time to disengage, but also was significantly less independent in their disengagement. So they needed much more support, prompts, as well as adult intervention to disengage. Whereas the low self-regulated group did fine in the low persuasive design condition. And at the same time, children with high self-regulation were better able to disengage regardless of the persuasive design level. So they were fine even at higher levels of persuasive design. So this offers us pretty novel insights into individual differences in susceptibility to extended digital media engagement because of persuasive design. It tells us which children are more susceptible, but also it shows that self-regulation may be a potential protective factor against some of those impacts of persuasive design. We still thought it was interesting, though, that we saw some similarities across the moderate and the high conditions because we didn't expect to find that. And we think perhaps what this shows is that the relationship between persuasive design and self-regulation might not be a linear or a straightforward one. Instead, maybe there is a threshold of persuasiveness where the psychophysiological triggers of the design features might be outpacing the available self-regulatory resources and the strategies that the child has. And this has implications, of course, for intentional persuasive design, which can be leveraged to support learning goals, child-centered and educational design that supports play and play goals. But at the same time, it shows that if you are going to have excessive amount of design features, lots and lots of manipulative and deceptive features, you are more likely to surpass that threshold and potentially then have the risk of problematic engagement increase as well. And this, of course, has very special implications, especially for families with impulsive or dysregulated or deeply feeling young children, because they need more support to make informed app choices. We need to be raising awareness about these apps that make profit, that function on the attentional economy and the monetization models. And we need to be raising awareness across all families to use these high-quality public-funded media like PBS Kids over here, but we also got ABC Kids in Australia. But of course, more sustainable and scalable solutions lie in regulations and standards before an app goes out into the market, before an app gets labeled educational. With that, we have to view the findings in light of some limitations. And perhaps this was already obvious to you when you saw the 3 screenshots of the apps. Children's experiences across the apps could have still differed beyond just persuasive design. At the end of the day, it was a different character, it was a different play, it was a different play sequence. So this highlights the really strong need for more controlled and more precise manipulation of persuasive design. But what if I tell you that our team has come up with an innovative solution for that? So we've got a fun and playful storymaker app, Giggle Scribbles, which has been developed by the Center for the Digital Child. So this allows us to turn on or off design features in a safe, controlled, and ethical manner. But at the same time, we have a capability that commercial app companies don't allow us to do, and that is log all user actions and timestamps of everything that happens. So we get to see the digital choices children are making, the time spent during the app play, so on and so forth. Also, it is ecologically valid because we are simulating design features that we see in popular apps, but we're making sure that it is still in a safe, controlled, and ethical manner because there's absolutely no monetization involved. Just, risky choices sometimes, but absolutely in an ethical manner, as I said. So with that, I can't go into detail because I'm close to running out of time. So I'd like to wrap up with that and just say the open access publication is in that link over there. And I'd love to chat about all things digital design and young children, but also if you'd like to chat about Giggle Scribbles, please do get in touch. I'd love to connect. Thank you very much for your time.
Now, for our final presentation, we have Dr. Jessica Wise Younger with Evaluating Effectiveness of Educational Games in Natural Settings. Jessica is an educational neuroscientist dedicated to developing effective interventions that empower learners to reach their full potential.
All right, great. Well, that was an excellent segue into my presentation. We did not plan that. But I'm excited to be talking to you all here about work that we do at PBS Kids. And I'm sure I don't need to tell this group, but mobile gaming is prevalent among kids, including PBS Kids' core demographic of ages 2 through 8. So that means there's a lot of opportunity for impact for educational games if they are made well, by which I mean they're effective, engaging, and reach many kids. And that leaves us with the incredibly important task of figuring out what works, what designs both teach kids while keeping them engaged, especially in informal settings like the home, though not keeping them addicted, as we saw in the last one. So there's lots of ways to determine what works, such as drawing on educational science research, conducting co-design sessions to get kids' input, doing play testing sessions to see what resonates and where friction points are. And PBS Kids engages with all of these types of research. But, as I'm going to show today, kids continue to find ways to surprise us once the game is released in the wild, and that's why it's important to conduct experiments in natural settings. So at PBS Kids, we developed a research tool to conduct randomized experiments on select games on our PBS Kids Games app, And for these games, we collect highly detailed user behavioral data that allows us to understand how kids approach a challenge, though we don't know anything about these users themselves because it's completely anonymous. We don't know the context, how they're using the game, things like that, but we do know that all of our sessions reflect the real lived experiences of how our games are used, which is critical for us. So the experiments I'm going to focus on today focused on instructional specificity. So when designing games, we're often in a tension between the right balance of explicit teaching and discovery through hands-on play. Research, of course, has shown that explicit teaching is important for learners to grasp the concept at hand, but there's also work that shows that it can reduce a learner's interest and likelihood of further exploration. So how do we effectively provide kids the supports they need without stifling their sense of curiosity? Whoops, I missed my animation. There you go. All right, so our first experiment was on the game Toy Maker from the series Work It Out Wombats from GBH Kids. And this game is aimed at teaching kids to engage in the simple, iterative, three-step design process of create, test, and improve. Players are asked to build toys that meet certain design criteria that they're presented with. And once players design the toy by selecting parts and modifiers, they test their design and improve it as necessary. The instructions that we focused on for this experiment come once a player has finished designing a toy and are able to test it for the very first time. The initial instruction was to say, when you're ready, tap the arrow button to build this toy. A straightforward, direct instruction for what to do. But ready is not very specific description of when to press the button, particularly for young learners. Do they understand that ready means it meets all of the design requirements they were given rather than just a fun toy that they really like? So we included a specific statement that says, when this toy has everything Mr. E asked for, then press the button. Then, to inspire curiosity and generative thinking, we also tested whether the prompt being a question versus a statement would have any impact on player behavior. So do questions get players to pause and reflect on their design before submitting? Let's see what happened. First, we consider whether hearing the full instructions, any version of them, would give kids an advantage compared to those who don't. So kids were able to skip the instructions in this game. And the very first time players were introduced to that test button, 70% of kids did not skip the instructions, which was actually somewhat surprising. That was a great result for us. But did it help them? No. It turned out that kids that skipped the instructions were actually more likely to get the answer correct on the first submission than kids who didn't, regardless of which instruction they got. So it didn't make them more likely to get it right, but did it influence their behavior at all? No. So our instructions didn't really have the impact they were intended to, which was to encourage them to stop and think about their design. And we think that's because, in addition to the audio, there was a visual instruction for the test button, and who can resist pressing a big pulsing button on the screen? So while it impacted our experiment here, this dual presentation is important for design for us as it provides multiple supports for kids. So we always want to make sure we have both audio and visual representation so kids understand what to do. So okay, instructions didn't make an impact at first, but what about over time? So maybe hearing it a few times will help it sink in. To do that, we tested some linear models on participants who got the first submission or the first round incorrect. So these were kids that definitely needed to improve. They didn't get it the first time. And these models revealed not a whole lot, but it did reveal a significant effect of experience. So the more rounds the kids played, the more likely they were to get it right. And that was consistent across all groups, which is great. In general, kids are getting better as they're playing. And there was also a statistically significant effect such that the specific statement group showed slightly greater improvement in terms of likelihood to solve and in speed to solve, which I'm not showing here. And as you'll notice, this is a really small effect size. There are thousands of kids in each of these groups, which is great. Everything's statistically significant, but then everything's statistically significant. So what does it mean? We did end up making this the default condition moving forward because we had some hints that these instructions were particularly impactful for more difficult levels, which I don't have time to get into here, but it might be that instructional framing is important for supporting kids when they are struggling the most. So this experiment was driven by literature in the learning and education space about the balance between specificity and encouraging curiosity in instructions. And overall, we found that specificity helped a little, but not that much. So next, I'm going to show an experiment inspired by play testing, and we'll see if these play testers were able to inspire changes that made a bigger impact. For this experiment, we used the game Stu's Delivery Service from the series Lila in the Loop by Mighty Picnic and Curious Games. And this game targets the design process as well, encouraging players to experiment and iterate using trial and error. So players are challenged to deliver items to customers through routes that are blocked by different obstacles. And players have to unlock tools to use when designing their Stu-mobile, as we call it, to successfully navigate through the obstacles and complete the delivery without losing too many items in their basket. During the playtesting for this game, we found that players were at first struggling to understand how the new tool that they unlocked and works and why they might select one tool versus another. And so through the playtesting process, the design team and our playtesters themselves came up with some support features to help players, which included a notebook that would visually demonstrate what the tool does, as well as a test track that allows players to try out a tool in a separate, simpler environment. The question then became, how much instruction do we give players? Based on our last experiment, it was clear that not everyone needs the instructions, but how much do they need? We want to keep kids engaged, which means putting as little barrier between them and the actual playing of the game. So instead of forcing the instructions, we can make additional supports optional, but if we do that, will they actually seek out that information that they need? So we answered that through 3 different conditions. The no instruction group weren't given any info about what the tools does, just notified that it exists, and it was visually pointed out to them so kids could get straight to the game. In the verbal instruction only group, they get a longer prompt telling them what the tool does, but no visual information, so still pretty quick in there. But then the visual and verbal explanation group got both longer verbal explanation as well as the notebook feature opened automatically for them, and that gave them a visual display of the tool function. And it was an additional overlay that they had to interact with before getting to the game. And regardless of what condition they were in, players could access the notebook, and that's also how they access the test track anytime they want. So it was just a matter of what did they get at the first time that they unlocked this tool. So let's see what happened here. Here, there was an effect on, not on all, but on some of the levels. So we looked at how likely players were to solve the level on their first visit and how many attempts it took them. So we saw the visual and verbal explanation group showed signs of better performance on 5 levels, including 2 particularly difficult ones. And in contrast, the verbal explanation group was not efficient in their performance across 3 different ones. And it wasn't strong and consistent across all levels, but we were excited the effects seemed to be showing up on particularly difficult levels, as it aligns with this idea that the feature wasn't required to play the game, but did support players when they need it. Now, for information seeking, by and large, these tools weren't used, even though they were requested. But we did see a clear pattern on the tool unlock levels, which is exactly where we'd expect to see it. So specifically, the no explanation group was more likely to open the notebook compared to the other 2 groups, and this is not including that automatic opening of the notebook that was done for the visual verbal group. And that's also great news. The players that were given the least amount of information were the most likely to seek out additional info. Also, the visual and verbal explanation group is more likely to use the test track than the other groups, which may have us asking, is there a link between support feature use and performance? So the visual verbal group had more exposure to these features and they performed what we might call the best. But follow-up analyses showed that players that used these features didn't perform any better than those who didn't. And that's likely due to a complex interaction between who's using the supports and for what purpose. So we are interested in doing more follow-up analyses to understand when they used the notebook, what tool were they testing, to really understand how these features are supporting players or not. So altogether, these results are highlighting the importance of studying how players interact with digital games in the wild. So these experiments were designed to test theories from science of learning work, as well as player input from play testing. Yet on average, the changes we made didn't make much impact to the players. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. To me, it indicates that children are robust learners and their learning doesn't hinge on us getting the instructions exactly right, so that's good news. But it does mean we need to calibrate our support. So clearly not all kids need the supportive instruction to be successful, but some do. So we need to continue to be thoughtful about how and when we provide those supports so that they're present for kids that need them, but not getting in the way for those that don't. And without humans in the loop, like teachers or AI or something to detect not just when, but how much support to provide, this calibration can be quite difficult. So for future research directions, we need a deeper understanding of who the players are that benefit from support and what their behaviors are so we can better detect struggle and when to intervene. And I do believe that's my time, so I'm going to just ask one question myself, and that's how can you support PBS kids at this time? And that's a wonderful question. Please go to supportmypublicmedia.org and tell your senators that you would like us to keep getting funding.